Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The House Armed Services Committee adopted an expansive right to repair amendment Thursday over the objections of the committee's chairman and several Republicans, setting up another major fight with industry over the Pentagon's access to technical data and software. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more details. Anastasia, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
The markup in the House Armed Services Committee was pretty contentious, pretty long. Where did right to repair come out in the course of the discussion?
Yeah, it was contentious and it was long, but when it came to right to repair, it was pretty bipartisan. So there was this amendment and it was offered by Representative Maggie Goodlander, she's a Democrat, and Representative Pat Harrigan, who's a Republican. And this amendment would establish government purpose rights as the default for any technical data, software, or software documentation delivered under future DoD contracts, unless a contractor can prove and demonstrate the need for more restrictive intellectual property rights. So contractors who are seeking some of those restrictions would have to provide a lot of documentations. They would have to provide detailed list identifying each piece of data or software they believe should receive that special protection. They would also have to provide evidence that the technology was developed using private funds and not taxpayer money. And they would also need to provide clause-specific unlimited rights exclusions. And if a contractor can't do that, if they can't provide this documentation, the Pentagon would automatically receive government purpose rights. Also, the Pentagon would get government purpose rights to technical data, software, and documentation if the defense secretary decides and determines that a contractor improperly marked information as proprietary, or if a contractor failed to exclude unrestricted rights categories. Here is Representative Harrigan.
We have planes that cannot fly. We have ships that cannot sail. We have vehicles that cannot drive and tanks that cannot crawl. And in some of our services, that number is approaching 50% of our force. It is a genuine readiness issue. And the core of this problem is surrounding really poorly negotiated contracts from the department over many, many decades. We heard today, and what we're trying to do in this bill within the defense industrial base is recognize that it's in trouble. Give it an injection of capital because it is incapable of scale. But if we inject over $250 billion more dollars without changing the way that we contract, we are not setting the Department of War up for success. We are not doing right by the American taxpayer.
Anastasia, there was already some right to repair language in the chairman's markup that the committee considered. How does this proposal align with what was already there?
So it's pretty limited. What Section 842 in the chairman's mark seeks to do, it would designate an intellectual property ombudsman and a mediation process to help the department resolve any disputes over intellectual rights with contractors. Those who supported the amendment, and like I said, the measure received overwhelming support, they said that section, it's just not enough. It just doesn't address the challenges that the department has been dealing with for decades. Here's Representative Sarah Jacobs.
Now, I know you're going to hear from industry. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I can out-argue a contractor's lawyer on the 5 points of intellectual property, but I don't need to, because the people who actually run this military have already told us what they need. You'll hear the department already has all the authority it needs. If that were true, the Secretary of the Army would not have sat in front of this committee and told us he cannot sign contracts to get it. You'll hear we're seizing their intellectual property. We're not. We're paying a fair price to fix equipment we already bought. The Army Secretary said it plainly. The Pentagon doesn't want to take the data, it wants to buy it. Every trade secret protection stays exactly where it is, and when the GAO went looking for a single case where the government compromised a contractor's IP, it couldn't find one. And we offered an alternative, the Ombudsman in the Chairman's Mark, Section 842. It's the version the contractors are comfortable with. It adds language that lets a company tie the department in knots by claiming almost anything that's a trade secret. That is not a right to repair. That is a loophole with a help desk.
And I also wanted to highlight Ranking Member Adam Smith's comments because I think he said it very eloquently. He said that, look, a lot of progress has been made when it comes to intellectual property, but industry created this problem to begin with in the 2000s and 2010s by locking the Pentagon in. But he also acknowledged at the same time industry's concerns. But he said the amendment really doesn't take IP rights away from contractors. Here's Adam Smith.
We have made progress in terms of the IP problems. And part of what drives this is the bad old days, basically the first part of the 21st century, when vendor lock was everywhere. IP was a major, major problem. Industry took complete advantage of defense contractors who negotiated horrific deals and wound up locking us into things that caused massive increase in costs. And also, because there was no competition, they didn't produce it. Basically, they'd give us an inferior product, and then the only consequence was they got paid more to fix it. All right? And they took advantage of that. Industry has only themselves to blame for the fact that we're having this debate by leveraging all of that. I think it's also worth noting that IP is important, all right? And I do understand private industry, they're very twitchy about this, and for understandable reasons. That's their secret sauce. This is what they developed. If all of a sudden it goes away, they're gone. So they are always very cautious about letting it go, and they should be. And we should be cautious about that because we need industry to develop these new technologies. But this amendment does not strip IP rights. It does not do that. If it did that, I wouldn't even consider supporting it. It takes a very narrow approach, more narrow than in the past. It's prospective, doesn't get into past contracts.
This amendment passed on a voice vote, Anastasia, but not everybody's a fan. What are you hearing from folks who sit on the opposite side of the issue?
Yeah, there were some Republicans who opposed it, and also the committee's chairman, Representative Mike Rogers, opposed it. He said he basically expressed the concerns of all the industry groups, which we will talk about in a second. But he said the amendment would force companies to choose between protecting their IP and working with the Defense Department, and long-term companies would just exit and stop doing business with the Defense Department. And of course, as you would expect, industry groups have already come out with their arguments and their opposition to the amendment. For example, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they issued a letter saying that they support Section 842 that requires a mediation process between the Defense Department and contractors. They say that it's a well-crafted compromise, but here's a quote from them. The Chamber believes this approach offers the best available path towards minimizing or eliminating unintended harm to the defense industrial base, but they strongly oppose to any attempt to impose a far-reaching, a more expensive right to repair framework. They say it would grant the Pentagon broad authority to access and effectively seize the manufacturer's intellectual property, trade secrets, and proprietary technical data.
This is still just the committee's version. What happens to the bill next?
Yes, of course, and the House is supposed to take up the bill by the July recess. Then we have the Senate Armed Services Committee. They will be marking up their version next week. We'll see what they come out with. But there will be many, many debates. There will be many arguments about this, and industry is going to push against these reforms. We know that last year they succeeded.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks for keeping us up to speed.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.